Hey guys, thanks for joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. If you're a returning listener, it's great to have you back. If you're new to the channel, really glad you joined us. Hope you like what you hear. Look, we keep bringing on awesome guests and we keep finding awesome people. Tonight's guest is no different. So Annie, her story takes all sorts of twists and turns. She wanted to be a sportscaster as a female in the 70s and 80s when that was just unheard of. And so you're going to hear her story about how she made that happen. You're going to hear her story about how she was kicked off of the air because she aged out. It wasn't pretty enough anymore. She was a sports official. She was a teacher. She's a mother after not being able to have children, but becoming a foster mom much later in life. So her story's super interesting. There's so much to learn from her experience. And so without further ado, let's bring Annie on to the channel right now. So Annie, welcome to Salty Ginger Talk. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So yeah, absolutely. I'm going to warn our listeners that short of a Dos Equis, Annie might be the most interesting person in the world. So her background is wild. You're not going to believe all the stuff that she's done, and you're not going to believe all the things that she has experienced. And we're going to get into all of that. There's great life lessons to learn in there because she has pivoted and lived many different lives in her time on this earth, and she's so gracious to share those stories with us today. So with that, Annie, let's just start. Why don't we just start with where you grew up and where you went to school and what your first job was out of school, and we'll take it forward from there because there's so many chapters to get to. I think if we take it in sequential order, that'd be great.
Okay. I am from northern New Jersey, a town called Livingston, which is like I could walk to the end of my street and take a bus into Manhattan in 35 minutes. And in fact, I thought all kids grew up like that. So when I went to college at Miami of Ohio, and the kids said, "You want to go into the city?" And they took me to Cincinnati, and I went, "Where's the city?" And I think they were offended. But anyway, yeah, great place to grow up. I thought everybody had Broadway and the Museum of Natural History and all the wonderful things New York can give you. But anyway, when I was 17, my mother came to me and said, "It's time for you to pick a college. What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I'm going to be a sportscaster." Well, that was 1972. There weren't women sportscasters. I had no idea. All I know is that I was on a broadcast crew in high school, which meant every morning we had a half-hour show. It was like a radio show. We played music, we did announcements, and I worked with the hockey team. I was an ice skater growing up. And so, like everybody who's been an athlete, I had these ridiculous dreams of gold medals, or, like anybody who plays on a team, they're all going to be pros. And most of us were never going to be that. So, anyway, I had that. I want to be an athlete in my heart. And I worked with the hockey team. And so one day, one of the hockey players came up to me, goes, "Would you read this on the show this morning?" And I said, "Sure." And so I got to the broadcast crew booth and I decided to pull all the sports stories out and I was going to read them. And the guys on the crew started yelling at me. They said, "You can't read the sports. You're a girl." And I said, "Well," and so we got in this argument. It's 5 minutes to air. And the teacher who ran the broadcast crew came and said, "If Annie wants to read the sports, she can read the sports. Move on." So I read the sports and they were angry. So I came in the next day and did the same thing. And the guys decided I needed theme music. So they would play Mission Impossible before I went on, dun, 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 dun. And then they started calling me Big Ann. Big Ann is up next with the sports. And they thought I would be offended, but I loved it. So when my mother faced me that day and said, "What do you want to be?" I'm like, "I don't want to be a sportscaster." And she said, "Don't be ridiculous. I'm trying to have a serious conversation with you." And I went to Miami of Ohio, took my classes in journalism and communications, and all the professors said, "You will never be a sportscaster. You are a woman."
Annie,
And yet,
sorry to interrupt. Was it Warner Wolf at that point? Was he the big name in sportscasting in 1972?
I'm going to tell you now, I didn't watch that much. I really didn't. I mean, I was, going to school and I just, hockey was the sport I grew up with. Today, I was before Title IX. So today I wouldn't be an ice dancer. I would have been a hockey player.
Yeah.
Okay. So just very different. I didn't spend a lot of time watching sports. So why I wanted to do this, it's a little odd. Yes, I know. So
No, it was Howard
anyway,
Cosell. It was Howard Cosell. That's
Howard
who it was.
Cosell. Yes, it
That's
was
exactly
Howard
who it
Cosell.
was. And I call it
And
out because most of our viewers don't have any inclination that back in the day, and you've got a couple of years on me, I'm 53,
I'm
but
70.
yeah. But back in the day, there was no sports center. There was no internet.
Oh, no, 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 no.
There was no sports on television in general. The only sports on television were like Monday Night Football was revolutionary. Wide World of Sports aired every Saturday. I used to wake up and watch NBC Game of the Week with Vin Scully and Joe Garagiola, and I was a West
Yep.
Coast kid. So I would watch the 1 o'clock start time. I'd get up at 10 o'clock and I would sit in my living room and watch. That was the only Major League Baseball I could see. It was once a week. It was at 10 a.m. So, like, I don't think you understand. So it was, and it was men. There was no, it wasn't a
No, there
question
were
of,
no.
yeah, it was
uh,
men, period. So I just want to set the table for the listener. Sorry to cut across. Please continue.
That's okay. Honestly, the only women sportscasters I ever saw were women in the Olympics. So, of course, Peggy Fleming would be in front of a microphone. And of course, that makes perfect sense. She's talking about women's figure skating. Okay, but those were the only women. And then Phyllis George, of course, Miss America, she was beautiful. And she'd be on the sidelines of a football game in her fur coat talking to the coach's wife. I know she was technically the first one, but I don't think I count that. So I don't know. It was ridiculous that I even wanted this thing. All I knew is that I liked being around sports and I liked being around athletes. Come on, they were hot. So
Sure.
I wasn't supposed to admit that, but I'd rather be in a room full of guys than a room full of girls. So I was even like that then. So anyway, senior year in college, they decided to do a half-hour sports show on the PBS station at Miami, Ohio. And they said, "Would you like to co-host it?" I said, "Yes, I would." And I was co-hosting with a male, of course. And I quickly realized that the football coach, the baseball coach, and the basketball coach all refused to be interviewed by me. They wouldn't even talk to me. So what am I supposed to do? So I was kind of frustrated at first. And then I went, wait a minute. We have all kinds of teams here. We have hockey teams and tennis teams and gymnastics and swimming and all these teams that nobody pays any attention to. So I started going to them and said, "I'd like to do a story." And they were thrilled because who pays attention to the wrestling team? No one. So that's how I got stories on the air. But remember, this was pre-recorded, so there was no live TV. And this is where I'll explain to you that I really didn't understand the ins and outs of the job that I thought that I wanted to do. So when I graduated with my degree, it got me absolutely nowhere. I moved to Washington, D.C., and couldn't even get an interview. And I ended up working in a bar in Georgetown in the late 70s and early 80s. And boy, was that fun. I'm glad there weren't cameras. Like today, everybody has pictures. I'm just glad there weren't cameras. But I worked in a bar, and my parents were horrified. They came down and had an intervention with me, saying, "We put you through college for this, so you could be a waitress." So it was bad. And one night, I went to a Washington Capitals game with my aunt, who was more like a sister, and she had a date, and the guy was an amateur ice hockey official. And he was bemoaning the fact that there weren't enough officials, just like today. There aren't enough youth officials, high school and down. And she said, "Oh, Annie skates." She goes, "Why don't you be a referee?" I said, "All right." I knew hockey. What I didn't know was hockey skates. I grew up on figure skates. Do you know the
Yep.
difference between the two? What's the
I
big
know.
difference?
Yeah, I'm a hockey guy, so I know exactly the difference: the long flat blade and the toe pick versus the
Toe
rockers on.
picks.
Yeah.
Toe picks.
Yep.
I worked a long shift at the restaurant. I was up till 3 in the morning, and I had a 6 o'clock hockey game. My first game was like 5-year-olds. They're so cute, right? Their little sawed up stick, their helmets don't fit, and their jerseys are down to their ankles. So I'm all ready, man. I got my stripes on, and I grab a puck and I skate out there, and I lean over to take that first face off, and I fell on my face
You
because I
don't. You
had
little.
never been on anything without toe picks.
Yeah.
And so I tried to get up, and figure skaters like me are lazy people, and I kept digging the toe pick of the skate, or the toe of the blade in, and I kept falling over. And I'm looking up at 5-year-olds who are looking down at me like, "What's wrong with the ref?" Right? I remember nothing else about that game, nothing. But I do remember driving home, and I realized I didn't know enough about sports to be a broadcaster. I just
Mm.
didn't. Okay. I knew the game of hockey. I didn't know anything else very well. And so I decided right then and there that I would become a certified amateur official in the 5 main team spectator sports: football, baseball, ice hockey, soccer, and basketball. And I would take 5 years and do that. And I believe that some forward-thinking news director would appreciate that and go, "She must really know what she's talking about," and would hire me. And that's exactly what happened. I ended up officiating. Now, I'll say this. I was sucked at soccer. I sucked at basketball. I was okay at hockey, but I ended up going to places where there wasn't hockey. And I baseball and football were the ones I loved the most. And even though I got into television, I worked for 5 TV stations. I never quit officiating until 2019 when I called my last high school football game, and I had been official for 40 years. So it's ironic to me that this thing that just seemed to be a vehicle to get me into television was something that of a lifelong journey for me. And today, I don't miss teaching, I don't miss TV, but I miss Friday night football.
I bet. So I told you guys we're only, a little bit into Annie's story here. And I told you it's interesting as hell. So I bet you didn't think we brought Annie on that she was going to talk about being an official for sports. I'll guarantee you didn't think that when we brought her on. So I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. You and I had such a great conversation the first time we connected before you came on the show. Um, so you're working in the bar. You decide after you referee hockey that, hey, you know what? I don't know enough about this to do the job that I said I wanted to do. You take action and you learn the 5 major sports by becoming an official in the 5 major sports. And then your plan works and somebody hires you as a broadcaster. Is that right?
Yes, yes. And I want to say, if you think about it, who knows more about the sports than the officials? I know we're always the bad guys, but you can't tell me coaches and fans read rule books and that they have to take I had to take national exams every year. I had to go through scrimmages. I had to, put crews together. So this was for most of us, it's an avocation, not a job. And quite honestly, we work really hard, and we have to study the games. I can look up who hit the most home runs in 1964, but I
Yep.
cannot, have to understand the games. So yes, I back then, before the internet, there was a magazine called Broadcasting Magazine, and in the back were want ads. And the thing, they were sneaky because they didn't tell you where they were. They said sportscaster wanted, apply to box 3924, send your resume and reel, right? And so I did that all the time and pretty much got ignored. And then one day I got a call from a guy who said, I'm the news director at WRBL in Columbus, Georgia. We'd like you to be our sports director and anchor the 6 and 11 o'clock news. I was like, really? I was 28. I was 28 years old. I'd been out of
Yeah.
college for 6 years. And he said, be here in 2 weeks. And so I loaded everything I had in the car, took my cat, and went to Columbus, Georgia. And I don't know if you know anything about Columbus, Georgia, or
I don't.
Georgia, but going from Washington, D.C. to Georgia it was 1983, was quite an experience. It was like going back Scotty beamed me 50 years earlier.
Mm.
And the fact that I was a woman sportscaster there. I mean, one day my boss got a phone call, and he goes, it's for you. And the guy on the phone said, that there lady sportscaster, she's a homosexual, ain't she? And like, thanks. I mean, that's the kind of crap that happened. But I got there and I realized I'd made a serious error. Well, I could talk about all the rules of games. I did not know how to do a broadcast. I had no
Mm.
idea.
Mm.
Okay. When I went to college and did it, was recorded. So, perfect example. I got there on a Sunday night. You're going on Wednesday night. I had 2 days, and I was very fortunate in my first 2 TV stations I worked for that there were men there that were sportscasters that should have been promoted above me. I should not have been hired as the sports director. They should have been promoted, but they were kind to me and helped me learn the business. And in this case, we're all running around. I don't know if you've ever been in a newsroom, but it's insanity all the time. And I didn't understand. Back in the old days, we had things called carbon paper. Do you know what carbon paper was? Are you
I've
old
worked on
enough?
carbon paper before in grocery stores. Yes.
Good. Carbon paper, we had 6 copies that went into our big old fashioned typewriters. And because lots of people needed the scripts, people don't
Yep.
understand that sports reporters, for the most part, write everything they say. I'm not talking about play by play and color at games. I'm talking about on the evening news, because there are a lot of people involved in putting that show together that need to know what you're doing. They need
Hmm.
to know example, when is Ann on camera? When are we bringing up the highlights from the football game? When is the score coming up? When is Ann back on camera? These are things people need to know. So there was a scripts we had to type on, and they had a line down the middle, and I had no idea what that line meant. Um, no one told me. So I just wrote what I wanted to say across the entire page. So I'm get on the set. My heart's up here because I'm frantic that I'm on live TV. And they say, "Oh, first woman sportscaster in Columbus, Georgia, welcome." And I turned to the teleprompter, and all of my sentences were cut in half. I also didn't know that I was supposed to have a copy of my scripts in my possession.
Mhm.
Today they're looking at their computers. Their tablets have the scripts there. But back
Yeah.
then, we always had physical copies. No one told me that either. So I'm up there for 3.5 minutes. I have no idea what I said. I do remember the anchor trying to shove his scripts towards me, but I didn't know what that meant. And it was like a car accident. I don't remember it. All I know is that apparently one of my mother's best friends was in Atlanta in a hotel and happened to turn to my channel and called my mother and said, "Oh, Marianne, I just saw Anne on the air. She was horrible." And my mother wouldn't see me on TV for several years. She refused.
Wow. That's an auspicious start in the broadcast
Yes, it
sports
was. I can't believe they
business.
didn't fire me, quite honestly. I can't believe it. And okay, it was an interesting place to be after living in Washington, D.C. It was like going back in time. Scotty beamed me 50 years earlier. Um, but I didn't know anything about television, being on live television at all. And I never considered that before. So you may remember carbon paper. Carbon paper is where you type and 6 copies are made, right? And I didn't understand what all those copies were for. And no one explained to me what the line down the middle of the sheet of paper was. Well, that was because you were supposed to give directions to the director, like Anne's on camera, here's the highlights, here's the score. And the other side was supposed to be just for the words you were going to say that were going to be shown on the teleprompter. But no one told me that. So I typed my script from one end of the page to the other, and I'm up there on the set freaking out because I've never been on live TV. And they say, "Oh, first woman sportscaster in Columbus, Georgia, yay!" And I turned to the teleprompter, and all of my scripts were cut in half. And it was a nightmare. I mean, it was like being in a car accident. Honestly, 3.5 minutes. I have no idea what I said. And I didn't know to have a copy of the scripts in my own hand. So the worst part was one of my mother's best friends happened to be in Atlanta at the time. She saw me on TV from a hotel and called my mother and said I was awful. And my mother refused to see me on TV for years because of that. But I didn't understand. I was very fortunate that again, some of the men I worked with were very kind and helped me. But I kept running into problems. Like one day, my boss said, "Go down to the Coliseum because the wrestlers are in town." And I went, "The wrestlers?" I thinking Olympic wrestlers are practicing here in Columbus, Georgia. No, it was the WWF,
Mm.
World Wrestling Federation. And I had never watched wrestling. All I knew was that it wasn't real. It was like a circus act. So I'm like, "Why are we covering this?" He said, "Just go do it." And I went down there and I was in this long gray hallway. There was nothing there. And I see this man in the distance, giant man, like 6'6", 330, kind of limping down the hallway towards me. And I'm looking at my partner who's got the camera. He goes, "Just ask him questions." And I realized I had no idea what to ask. If you're a football player, baseball player, I know what to ask you. I had no idea what to ask this man. So he's got this scraggly wet hair and he's a mess. Looking back, he was probably roided out of his mind
Sure.
because I said, I have to be honest. I said, "I don't know anything about wrestling. I just know it's not real." And he looked at me and he took the collar of his t-shirt and pulled it over and he goes, "Real? Does that look real to you, honey?" Stitches everywhere. And then I'm like backing up, and then he pulls up his pant leg and his knee is stitches, scars everywhere. "Is that real? Do you think that's real?" And he's like spitting on me. I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm not going to make it through this." So what did I learn? Years later, I became friends with a man named John Minton III, whose wrestling name was Big John Stud.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
don't know if yeah, nicest
I,
man on the planet. Sadly,
I
he's
knew Big John
deceased.
said I was a huge wrestling fan growing up. So
I
um,
knew nothing. And so when I became
yeah.
friends with John, he kind of laughed about that. I just didn't understand. So today, yes, I know they're athletes. Of course, they're athletes.
And they're
But
entertainers, but they're both, you
yeah,
know?
in my world, there, you don't know who's going to win till it's over.
Yeah.
It's not scripted. So God, that today I wish I could find whoever that wrestler was because I don't remember and apologize because clearly he was an athlete. But I mean, I made mistakes like that. Um, I also got baited into doing things I shouldn't have done. For example, because I was an official, I was used to being in places where women are not used to being, and the newsroom, because quite honestly, there were very few women in the newsrooms back then who weren't like as secretaries or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was asked to go out and interview an Olympic equestrian. This was at another job in Phoenix. And I went out, and the guy was kind of a snot, he just wasn't very nice. And I just, while my cameraman's getting ready, we were finishing up, I think. And I said, I just casual conversation. I said, "Oh, I like to ride. I like to ride, through the woods." And he goes, "Oh, really? So you think you're a rider?" And I kind of stopped, and he threw the reins of this beautiful horse at me.
Oh,
He
good
goes,
Lord.
"Go ahead." Yeah, he goes, "Go ahead, jump the course." And this is like fences and water features
Yeah.
and I'm like, crap. And he crossed his arms like, yeah, go, yeah, like you're gonna do it. So it was a dare, and I was so used to men doing that kind of thing to me. I went, fine. And I got up on that horse. Now, do you ever ride?
I've
You know the
ridden like
difference?
twice in my life, so no.
Okay, you know the difference between a Western saddle and a European saddle, an English saddle.
I don't.
Ours have pommel horns, the horns so you could wrap the rope and catch, get a cow. They don't
Yep.
have those on those kind of saddles. There's nothing there. There's nothing in front of you. And for people that aren't very good riders, you could grab onto that if you were in trouble. This saddle didn't have that. It was barely a saddle.
Mm.
So I got on that big horse and I kicked it. We galloped to the first fence and I bailed. I pulled the horse back and went, I'm going to kill myself here. But the guy was laughing. The guy was laughing at me. So I turned around, I took the horse back and I gunned him into that first. We went over the first fence, went over the second fence, and I have a death grip on that horse's mane because
Mm.
I'm like, oh, die here. And so then we got to the next one, the last jump, and it was up over a fence down into a water feature that was lower. I don't know how
Ooh.
high these things were. But I was horrified. And I'm holding on because I didn't want him to think I was afraid. And I got to, and then at the end, there's like 100-yard gallop, right? I got to the end of that and my legs were shaking so hard I couldn't stand. I couldn't get off the horse. But I'll tell you this, the guy stopped laughing at me and he grabbed the reins and stalked away. But when my boss saw that, it's like, what are you doing? But he put it on the news. He used it because my cameraman filmed it. So I would sometimes do things like that in retrospect were kind of stupid. But I lived in a world where I didn't belong,
Yeah.
and for most of my career, whether it was officiating or whether it was sportscasting. So yeah, I did things like that sometimes.
Yeah. And so for our listeners, we talk a lot on the channel about taking control of your life, going after what you want, solving problems, finding a way to accomplish things that you want to accomplish, and not worrying about things you don't have control over. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned here from Annie,
Yes.
even at the beginning of her career. So male dominated field. She's told multiple times, you're a woman, you can't do it. She doesn't listen to that. She works, she takes action. We talk about that a lot, that taking action almost always leads you to someplace good, even if it's not a place you thought you might go or wind up. But taking action is a good thing. So she becomes an official in 5 sports to get more educated on how to talk about and learn about the sports. She gets the random phone call that she's prepared for because she's been taking action. She moves from New Jersey to Ohio to Georgia. So you talk about someone that's pursuing things and continuing to take action. And so I think it's important to recap all of those things. And it's difficult, I think, for a lot of people who didn't experience what life was like in the 70s and 80s from I don't even know what the right term is, but a chauvinistic society.
Yeah.
It was much more compartmentalized back in the day. There were certain things that were male dominated, certain things that were female dominated, and never between the two shall cross. So there's just a ton of stuff here for people to learn and think about. So I just, one of the things I do, Annie, when we're talking with guests is recap some of the themes we talk about all the time on the podcast, because I want people to see that there's hundreds, thousands, millions of people who have taken action and built lives that they want, even if it wasn't a life they knew that they wanted, but they got there by taking action. So, like your story is such a great example of that. And I think it's just a really good thing to call out for the listeners. How long were you in Columbus, Georgia at this TV station?
Yeah, I spent all those years wanting to be a sportscaster, got the job, quit after 8 months to go back to Washington, D.C. to get married. And I got back to DC. I was engaged to a football player, an NFL player. And I got back and realized I'd made a mistake. So now I'm back without a job again. And I started applying for jobs again. And I went from there to Rochester, New York, where I worked for 2.5 years for a station there. Lovely time, loved Rochester. Again, I had a wonderful male partner there who didn't object. Probably he felt slighted that he didn't become the sports director, but he always helped me. And so I got better. I got better at understanding how TV works. I got better at understanding that the most valuable thing for a sportscaster to be able to do might surprise you. It's writing. We write everything we say. Okay. There's no ad-libbing and or very little. And the bottom line is I had to learn how to tell a story. I had to tell a story in 15 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute or 3 minutes. It just depended. So there are a lot of parts of sportscasting or broadcasting in general that people don't understand. I can't tell you how many times men have sat next to me at a bar going, "Oh man, I could do your job. I'd love your job." I'm like, no, you couldn't do it.
Mm.
It's very difficult. And when I die, I'm going to die a little early because of the stress from being on live television, which I was on. I think I once counted up, I was on live TV about 2,000 times. And it's hard. That's why they drink a lot. Okay, because after you go through the day, go, "Oh, it's showtime," and then you drop down, and do it again if you're in local TV. It's exhausting. It really is. So yeah, I went from Rochester, New York, and then I got a phone call. Please go to Phoenix. I had an agent at that point. And here's what I'm going to explain to people. You can't get attached to where you are. You can't get attached to people. For a woman, you could certainly not have children or be married, because if you were pregnant, they wouldn't put you on the air back then. Secondly, let's say you're married to a police officer or a professor who's got tenure. You got to pick up and leave. So every 2 years, I moved somewhere. So I was 2.5 years in Rochester, New York. Then I went to Phoenix, Arizona, where I worked for 2 years. Then I got hired at ESPN, and I was there for about 2 years. And then I had an unfortunate thing happen. I was pushing 40. And back then, when women were on television, you're pushing 40, you can't get a job anymore. You're not pretty enough to be on camera. So yeah, that was quite a moment in my life. But so I worked and then I did go back to Phoenix, and I worked for 2 seasons for the Phoenix Suns. I was their studio host. I did a half-hour sport show, NBA show before. I did halftime, and we did a call-in show at the end. But that was part-time. It was only, NBA season. So after that, I was done. I was almost 40, and I was done. I have to say, most of the stations that I worked at, there were some lovely people, but sadly, there were also some jerks. And again, since I was almost always the only woman on the plane, or, because we'd all travel with the teams, that kind of thing, it was difficult, and it was the most frustrating at ESPN, because they didn't seem to think I knew what I was talking about, which I didn't understand, because why did you hire me then? And I'll give you a perfect example. Are you a baseball fan?
I'm a huge baseball fan.
Okay, good. You'll understand the story then. So on SportsCenter, if you're lucky, sometime during the workday, your production assistant runs up to you and says, "Here's some highlights." And they'll mark sort of what the highlights are, and then you put them in your own words, since we all do highlights in our own verbiage. And so that's a perfect scenario, but it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes a game ends while you're on the air. So what happens then is the young production assistant comes sliding into the newsroom, or to the set, and hopefully in a commercial break, and they throw a highlight sheet at you, and then the red light goes on, and there we are, and you got to read what they wrote. So in this case, the first shot says, "Oh, let's go to Wrigley Field, where a fan has gotten hit in the front row with a foul tip." I said that because that's what was written, but it's wrong. It's clearly wrong. That can't happen. So At the end of, I had to move on to the rest of the highlights. So it was not corrected. It bugged me the whole show. And so at the end of every sports center, there's something called a post-mortem. And that means everybody involved in the show sits around a big conference table and we talk about what went well, what went poorly, and what can we do better. And so everybody's talking. Finally, I said, I raised my hand. I said, look, Rich, and I pointed at the young production assistant. I said, I have to talk to you about that first play. He goes, what do you mean? The foul tip that hit the guy in the front row? I said, yeah, that can't happen. That's impossible. He said, what do you mean? Okay, so when I was at ESPN doing SportsCenter, if you were very fortunate, you got to see the highlights before you went on. And a production assistant would come up to you with a sheet of paper and the 4 highlights, and you'd go fine and you'd put them in your own words because we all do highlights differently. So, but sometimes that didn't happen. Sometimes while you're live on the SportsCenter set, a game would end while you're there. So a production assistant would come sliding in and throw you some highlights in a commercial break, and you had to do them without seeing them. So this one night, this kid comes in and the red light went on instantly. And I went, oh, now let's go to Wrigley Field where a fan in the front row has been hit with a foul tip. I knew that was wrong, but I had to move on and do the next set of highlights. And so I was annoyed the whole time. But at the after SportsCenter's over, there's always something called a post-mortem. And that's where everybody involved in the show sits around a big conference table and they talk about what went well, what went poorly, and what should we do better. So everybody said everything they wanted to say. And then finally I raised my hand and I said, Rich, to the little production assistant who's like 21. I said, look, that first play, he said, yeah, the one where the guy got hit with a foul tip in the front row. I said, that can't happen. That's impossible. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, a foul tip is a ball that goes from the bat to the catcher's glove. It's caught. It's a strike, but it's a live ball. So if I've got somebody coming from third stealing home, I have to let them do that. If it's a foul ball, which is a ball that goes out of play, it's a dead ball. Foul, which means that guy coming home from third, he's got to go back. Everybody's got to go where they were at the time of the pitch. There's silence. All of these sports guys are just staring at me. And finally, the kid jumps up. He goes, you're nothing but a picky bitch. And I said, no, I'm an umpire. And some people know I'm an umpire, and that's a mistake I shouldn't make. And no one backed me, no one in the whole room. And the worst part was the next day, my boss calls me in and goes, I heard about what you said last night. And he said, I need you to apologize. I said, what are you talking about? I was right. He goes, yeah, but you hurt the production assistant's feelings. I'm like, really? Do you think if Chris Berman had said that to this kid, he'd have to? They made me apologize.
You gotta be shitting me.
No, and no one ever said I was right. They made me apologize because I had the audacity to criticize a guy. I didn't criticize.
It's funny.
I just said, this is a football rule. It's important we get it right.
Yeah, it's been one of my right, wrong, or indifferent, but in general, I'm critical of sports broadcasters, save like the Troy Aikmans of the world that do play by play. That I really enjoy Troy Aikman because he doesn't talk about him being Troy Aikman. He talks about the game from the perspective of someone that's played it. And it's my opinion that most sports broadcasters don't have much, if any, sports experience. And so it's got nothing to do with being male or female. It's got to do with being an athlete and a non-athlete. And as someone that, I went through college on a baseball scholarship, and I was talking to a couple of clubs about a free agent deal back in the day. And I was a right-handed pitcher that threw in the high 80s, low 90s. There were thousands of guys like me that you didn't need to waste a draft pick on a guy like me. I was talking to the Reds, the Cubs, and the Padres about signing and going to instructional league. I met my wife and wound up getting married to her instead. Zero regrets 33 years later. I've never once regretted walking away from baseball, but I loved everything about that world. I loved every minute that I played. And if I had been single, you'd have had to drag me out of the clubhouse and I would have been holding onto the door, trying to stay in it as they cut me. So I loved everything about it. But
I'm sorry.
No, it irritates me when people talk about it like they know about it, because unless you experienced it, you can't really know about it. And there's lots of ways to experience it. You can experience it as an official. You can experience it as a clubhouse attendant. You can experience it as a coach or a manager or a general manager or a player. But talking about it from 1,000 miles away isn't the same thing.
I know. If I'd been a guy, maybe they would have accepted it more. But I think they were also shocked that I knew something that they didn't consider. that they were offended. But things like that happened all the time. There was this guy who used to wander around the newsroom. I had no idea. I only knew his name was Howie, and he didn't seem to have a position. But it turns out he was the sports stats guy. He was the
Mm.
fact man. This was
Oh,
before the
Schwab?
internet.
Is it Schwab?
No, I'm not.
Oh,
Honestly, I don't remember his last name, but this was 90 to 92. So I don't remember Howie's last name, and I don't think I'd say it anyway, but I do remember Howie. And
fair enough.
he was that guy. And so he never talked to me, but he was the one, before, now you can go on the internet and find anything you need. Back
Yeah,
then that didn't happen. So you could go to Howie and say, when was the last time the Jets won in the snow at home in November? Right. He would go, he would know. I'm sure he had a big room full of books and he would find it. But anyway,
sure.
this one night in a bind, I hadn't needed a piece of information. He happened to walk by my desk and I said, Howie, and I asked him for this information. He gave it to me. I don't remember what the fact was. All I know is I went on the air with it. Next day, my boss calls me in and says, why did you say that on the air? I'm like, what do you mean? And he gave me the piece of information that Howie had told me. And I'm thinking, oh no, Howie messed up and I don't want to throw him under the bus. And then I saw Howie leaning in the doorway of the boss's office. And I looked at him and he was looking kind of smug. And I went, well, I asked Howie for that information and he gave it to me. And he looked at me, he said, I never told you anything. So now
So he
I'm the
set you
only
up.
one. Yeah, he did.
Hmm.
I'm the only one that can't ask the stat guy for help. So yeah, it was very frustrating. It really was. And it wasn't fun working there. Now, am I glad I did it? Yeah, I am. And I'm not going to say there were some lovely people there. Dan
Sure,
Patrick, Chris Berman. There were some really nice guys there. But I think it was ones that were hadn't been at the station as long as them. Those guys knew I was no threat to them. But
sure.
some of the other guys who I came on with at the same time, I think the idea of losing out to a woman on the set was offensive to some of them. Again, there were plenty of nice people, but we tend to remember the ones who were jerks.
Right. Yeah. Well, like it's the same in any group of people. And it's like that's the challenge with um stereotyping. And look, I think we've gotten a little too, just my own opinion, we've gotten a little too sensitive about joking around about stuff. There's a big difference between acting like a jerk or a misogynist or a racist or whatever and banter back and forth between people. And again, I grew up in a sports world where the banter was part of it. Like that was part of being a part of the group was, telling jokes about each other or making fun of each
Oh, I
other
don't mind
or
that.
yeah, that's not
That
what you're
is
talking
not,
about, though. There's a very big difference between
no.
what you're talking
I'm
about
talking
and
about
what I'm talking about.
sabotage.
Yeah, no,
I'm
no, I
talking
got it. Yeah,
when I worked at Channel 10 in Phoenix, I was covering the NBA playoffs, and it was Golden State and the Phoenix Suns, and we were up in San Francisco. I think we are in San Francisco, and all of the media people in Phoenix traveled with the team on the plane, and we stayed in the same hotels, and we were at the same press conferences, so we got to know each other. And I'll never forget this one day. I had to do an interview with Manute Bol.
sure,
And the night before, we're all having cocktails. We'd have, I think it was after the game. And I asked a broadcaster from another station. I said, Mike, when's the press conference tomorrow morning? He said, 10 o'clock. He said, great. So my cameraman and I arrived at the press conference at 9:30. Everybody was gone except for him. He's sitting on the chair in the practice court with his hands behind his head, his legs stretched out. He goes, "Oh, Annie, are we a little late for the press conference?" So he intentionally told me the wrong time.
yeah,
Now I have a piece I'm supposed to do, a minute and a half piece on Manute Bol, and there's no one there. At that moment, he walked out. I thought my cameraman was going to kill him. I had to calm him down. And there was a woman, the woman media, head of media for the Golden State was there. Strange to have a woman in that role back then. And I told her what my problem was. I said, "I'm sorry, we weren't here for the press conference." And she said, "Well, I can tell Manute you're here, but this is his time. He doesn't have to come out. They're off till tonight. So I'll try, but please, I can't guarantee anything." And I stood there and I waited trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do in the news. Because, if you don't do the piece you're supposed to do, there's a hole in the news.
mm,
And and so I was horrified. And damn, if Manute Bol didn't come out, he was the most charming, pleasant man. And, he was 7'7" and just a lovely man. He did not have to do that. And I remember he was so tall that I was holding my mic, I was standing on my toes and I was holding it up in the air. I barely got to his chest, right? He's a big man. And he was so charming and he rescued me. And I try to remind myself to remember the people like him
Yeah.
that were there for me when things were falling apart. But that man set me up like that. That's the kind of thing. It's like, why I'm no threat to you. Why would you do that? So anyway, things most of the time worked out, but sometimes I had to go over a few bumps to get my job done.
Yeah. So you wind up, you age out, you've done the Suns show for a couple of years. Where did you go from there?
Well, I when I went back to
Oh, Annie, we're losing you again.
uh, I'm sorry, I'll log in again. Leaving ESPN.
Oh, there we go. So James, we're recording again.
When I aged out of TV, it was very hard. I mean, I hate to tell you, I was depressed for quite a while, and I didn't want to see anybody I knew. I was afraid of that question. So what are you doing now? And I was sure I went back when I went back to Phoenix. I was in the middle, I was going to get a divorce. I was in debt. I had nowhere to live. I had two big
Mm.
dogs and four cats in a geoprism. Okay. And a friend of mine said, come, I have a new condo, come and live with me. I said, I got these animals. She goes, it's okay. It's all right. Come back to Phoenix. And I got there and I talked to my old boss at Channel 10. He goes, I'm going to have a job with you for you in 4 months. Just relax. I went, great, wonderful. Except one day I opened the paper and he'd been fired.
Oh no.
And the new news director, yeah, wanted nothing to do with me. And so I tried to get jobs. I couldn't get a job in any TV stations. And I was so desperate. One day I saw a sign for a bartender at a sports bar. It was a brand new sports bar. And I went, I got to make some money here. So I walked
Sure.
in
Yeah.
and I went to the manager. Look, I can keep your patrons entertained whether they're sober or not, and I can make a great cocktail. And he looked me up and down like I was literally a piece of meat. And he said, I don't think so. And I realized he wanted some 20 something in a short skirt and a push up bra. And I was pushing 40.
Yeah.
And so I went back to the one thing that people would pay me to do, and that was being an official. And so I went from ESPN to calling Pop Warner and Little League and high school ball, baseball and football. And I didn't want anyone to know me. I mean, I hid behind my uniform and behind my mask and my chest protector in baseball. I did not want to run into anybody because I didn't want them to ask me, so what are you doing now?
Yeah.
I was embarrassed. And one day I'm in the grocery store after a baseball game, and I'm in my blue umpire shirt. It's all sweaty from a game and my gray pants and my baseball shoes. And I'm buying groceries, and some man is staring at me. And he comes up to me, he goes, didn't you used to be somebody? I was like, I just walked away. I was horrified. I really was. And so I did a great deal of feeling sorry for me. And two things changed that. I was umpiring one day, and I often I didn't know, we got scheduled everywhere. And this man with a very profound limp, white beard, um, big smile, like mostly they weren't thrilled to see me. They were like, why didn't they send a real umpire? Right. And turns out he was a Vietnam veteran. He war hero, special forces, been wounded, left for dead in Vietnam, father of 8, and he was dying. And he was my partner for 5 years. He had Agent
Mm.
Orange poisoning. And he was my partner for 5 years. And so I would work with Don like 3 or 4 nights a week. We'd do double headers. He was my best friend. And I would sit, I don't know if you've ever seen umpires in like amateur baseball, but we dress out of the back of our cars. We bring our folding chairs and get dressed in the parking lot. We spent a lot of time together. The entire time I complained about my sad little life, that my husband was an alcoholic and that I couldn't get a job and that no one would put me on TV, poor me. And here's this guy whose life is a complete mess who never complained. He only supported me. And I started to realize that things I thought were important, like being on TV, were not important at all.
Mm,
And during that time, a number of other people said, you know, you should be a teacher. You're always around kids. You've done officiating for all these years, and it's kids. You should be a teacher. And I kept saying, I don't want to be a teacher. I want to be a sportscaster. But I went back to school. But it took me like 4 years of feeling sorry for me. And so I went back to college, got a teaching cert, ended up teaching in a Title I school where the vast majority of the kids lived in poverty, 75%. And I grew up in a middle class neighborhood in northern New Jersey. I had not been around poverty. So I really thought my first year or two that I was going to end up back in TV, and this was just a short stop for me. I ended up teaching in that school for 20 years. And I learned a few things. You know, I went in there all guns blazing, like, you want to be professional in the world, you want to have a good job, you need to be on time, you need to be a professional person. And one day, I had a video class, and the kids had all done a horrible job. They weren't getting their homework in. It was just a mess. And I read them the riot act. Yes, I did. And there's silence. And one little girl stood up in the class. She goes, "We don't like you." And I was speechless. And she said, "We don't need you." And she left. And every kid in that class followed her out of the room. All of my students left.
mm.
And I stood in front of an empty classroom and I cried. I don't cry a lot, but I did. And another teacher came up to me a little later and she said, "Have you ever considered being nicer?" Like, nicer? There's no nice in TV. There's no nice on a football field. She goes, "You need to be nicer." And I rolled that around in my head. And then a little short time after that, I dragged a kid out of class and I started berating him for being late every day. His first period, he was late every day. I said, "You can't do this. You will not be a success. You must be punctual." And he's looking at his shoes and he's like 14. And he goes, "Miss Montgomery, I'm really sorry, but last night I had to sleep on my uncle's couch. And I never know where I'm sleeping every night. And I didn't understand the bus system from where I was. And I'm so sorry I was late." And I realized, I'm talking to a 14-year-old kid who's homeless.
Yep.
And the light went off in my head going, I need to be nicer. Now, that does not mean that I didn't hold kids accountable. It just meant I went out of my way to find out what their difficulties were. Because if a kid is hungry, do they care about their homework? No. You know, if a kid hasn't had a shower in 2 weeks, you know, are they comfortable in class? No. And we had 400 kids in foster care. So I started to realize that I was a jerk and that I cared about things that were really not important. I didn't care about not being on TV anymore. And I started looking at my students as individuals who, maybe if you didn't get your homework in or you're having a hard day, maybe I'll sit down and ask you why. And I guess I became nicer. So it was something I never expected to happen in life.
Well, are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Have you ever read that?
Yes.
Yep.
But I can't,
So,
you
so
got to be happy and content and safe. And I can't remember. It's like a pyramid thing, right?
yeah, it's a pyramid. That's right. And so the bottom, it started off as 5 levels, a pyramid with 5 levels, and it's since been kind of stratified even more. I think there might be models that have 7 levels and 11 levels, but the basic concept is you start at the bottom, and it is the most primal of your needs. Do you have
But your
oxygen?
food,
Yeah.
yes,
Do you have food? Do you have water? And if you can't satisfy those needs, you're not going to give a shit about anything above that because
exactly,
you are preoccupied with literally fucking staying alive. And
exactly.
it's something that, and I didn't grow up in poverty either, but I was around a couple people that did grow up in poverty. So I was exposed to it. And then just throughout my life, I've been around a lot of poverty and a lot of homelessness and those kinds of things. And I'm not an apologist in any way, shape, or form for those situations, but I do have empathy in those situations. And I generally don't have sympathy, but I do have empathy. And I think it's important to understand the difference between those two because feeling sorry for people in those situations is not going to help them. Having empathy and helping them find their way, and that could include providing support in the form of money or of food or of a place to stay or whatever the situation is. But if you understand what they're going through, it allows you to give them the help that they actually need. And it's something that I try to use in my adult life a lot. And I learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs like in my late 20s, early 30s. And look, I can be a huge prick. Like if you want to get into an asshole contest, I'm gonna win it. Like it's tough to be a bigger prick than I can be. Um, but that's not a good way to accomplish what you want to accomplish, and you don't feel good. Even if you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, you don't feel good about it because you treat people like shit to get it done. And I'm speaking from personal experience here. I'm only talking about me, Joe Canfield, right? I'm not casting aspersions at anybody but myself. And I've gotten a lot better at it over the years because you have to understand what people are going through if you're going to relate to them. And that's so important. I love hearing you talk about it.
Well, especially teenagers. I mean, I
Yeah.
was a high school teacher, and we had kids that were coming from abuse, neglect, drugs, gangs, teen pregnancy, foster care. It was endless, and you had and teachers in those situations, and actually all teachers, we have to look at our kids as people and figure. You're right. If you're hungry, you're not gonna care about your homework. So it was quite a change for me, and even a bigger change that happened because of that. I was unable to have children of my own, which grieved me for a decade or so. And then I got over it. And then I'm 55 years old. I often had my students over and over again because I taught journalism, I taught newspaper. And so the kids would take my class year after year. They liked me, I guess. And I worried about them over the summer because 10 weeks of unstructured time
Mm.
for kids that live in poverty areas is very difficult. And so I worried about them. And even though they told me never to do this, I did it anyway. I would put my phone number on the board and I said, look, if you get in trouble, call me. I will do what I can to help you. And one year, this kid called me, this little kid I barely knew, I became a reading specialist for a while. And he was 14, very quiet. And he calls me up and he says, Miss Montgomery, how are you? And I start talking to him. And I'm like, Brandon, is there something I can do for you? He said, no, no, I just wanted to talk. I said, okay. And he called me a few times that summer and I couldn't figure out, I knew something was wrong. So I said, well, Brandon, I put you in the journalism class next year. So you'll be in my class. I can't wait to see you. And school started and he wasn't there. Couple weeks go by. I tried to call him. His number had been disconnected. And so I'm like, it was bothering me because I didn't know where he was. But often kids disappeared. They're very transient sometimes. And then he called me and he goes, Miss Montgomery. I'm like, Brandon, where have you been? He goes, well, Miss Montgomery, I'm hungry. I said, what do you mean you're hungry? And he said, well, I'm in foster care now and they lock up all the food in the morning and they won't give me any food at school because the paperwork didn't come through. So I'm hungry and I am pissed. I am pissed. And I'm lucky there were no kids in my classroom. I start swearing. And the teacher told me to be nicer. She goes, what's the matter? I said, I told her the story. This kid called me. He's hungry. She goes, oh, well, just call foster care and say you'd like him to live with you. I said, don't be ridiculous. I'm 55 years old. I've never been a mother. I don't know how to be a mother. She said, then stop complaining. I called foster care. 2 weeks later, that child was dropped on my doorstep. I went to foster mom school. Yes, it's a thing. 10 weeks of foster mom school. Brandon came to live with me. It was a project. You know, people think love is enough. It's not. You need a village with this. You need all kinds of help.
Yeah.
And I ended up having 2 legal foster children and 2 other kids who call me mom. And today they're all in their 20s and they still call me mom. And I have a grandson who's 7 from my oldest, Brandon. And so I ended up becoming a mom when I couldn't have imagined such a thing. And here I thought TV was the thing, right? Now I'm like, I have a 7-year-old grandson. How did that happen? So yeah, it's been quite an adventure.
Yeah, and that's what I love about your story, Annie, is that it's taken you places you never could have imagined that it took you. And even clearly not everything went right, and you've been very candid about that, which I really appreciate because I think it's so important for our audience to understand anytime you see someone who's successful, not for nothing, but Annie now splits her time between Arizona and the Virgin Islands. And, she's built a great life for herself. She's got children and grandchildren and people that care about her. And all of that came from taking action, even when things sucked, even when things seemed like there was no future, even when things seemed like, hey, this is the end of the road. I don't know what the fuck I'm going to do. And she kept getting up
Exactly.
and kept taking steps, you know? So I love the message that's in there. So you started with one foster child, and did you just encounter other children that you bonded with, or did they seek you out and place children with you? How did you wind up having multiple
They were
foster
all my
children?
students. They were
Oh,
all my
okay.
students. They were all kids that I dealt with on a regular basis. And they were my students. And, my daughter, she was homeless most of her life. Her mother dragged her from place to place, couch to couch. And she was a brilliant, wonderful kid. She was the editor of the newspaper. And she came in crying in December before she graduated and said, I'm dropping out of school. And I said, what are you talking? No, you're not. And she had nowhere to go. They were homeless again. And so she and her mother lived in my house. And that was a bit of a nightmare for a while. But that girl today, she's going to graduate from Arizona State University.
Wow.
She's finished everything. She's just working on her minor in business. And it's hard when you come from a family where no one ever went to college. That's just doesn't happen. My youngest son, Troy, he was autistic, is autistic, I guess. And when I met him, everybody said, well, he'll never be anything. And even his biological family said he'd never graduate from high school. He graduated from high school. He graduated from Arizona State University. He's a nutritionist with the Veterans Administration at the hospital in Phoenix. He snowboards, he climbs mountains. He's my one kid who is a scuba diver because we're scuba divers here. And I, he's great. He's mildly autistic, but everybody wrote him off. And
Yep.
and so in the school I was in, these kids were everywhere. Sometimes I felt bad because I couldn't take more of them because it's hard. And and you go through if you have kids and you know what boys, I had three boys, and when they're 18, when they're 16, 17, 18, you want to shoot them because they have to go fight in the driveway because he's playing rap music in front of everybody. And I'm like, you can't do that. There are people that work nights. There are people with kids. And he goes, you're the only one that cares. And he left for a year. And now he's the biggest mama's boy on the planet. I mean, he's the one that has the son. So yeah, that you go through horrible things, especially with teenage boys. And now we're all, Thanksgivings are fun at our house because it's all, everybody came from somewhere that was tough. And we've all grown through the bad teenage years. Again, he's going to be 30. So I've got 30, 28, 25, and 24, maybe. Not. It was one of the most, that I thought being an umpire, being a referee and an umpire and being a sportscaster was tough. Being a mom was tough. It was really hard. Now I'm enjoying it. Now they're grown up and they're like, they like me now. Because kind of with my students, I wasn't always nice. I had to be hard on them. But I wouldn't, honestly, I wouldn't have changed anything. I really wouldn't. And I think if things hadn't been hard for me early on, or people kept saying no to me, you can't do those things, that I wouldn't have survived it all. I don't know what would have happened to me in that period where I was depressed and feeling sorry for me if I hadn't already gone through some tough times in work. So yeah, I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, looking back on it, um, what like pick the top three lessons you think you learned from all of the trials and tribulations that you went through. What would you share with the audience as someone that's traveled the road further than some people? For younger people that are need someone to say, "Hey, think about these things when things are tough," or think about these things when you don't want to keep going. What would those three things be from your perspective?
For me, and understand, I just think I'm basically a stubborn human being. Maybe not the smartest, but I would say take no as a gift. If someone says, no, you can't do that, and start to ask yourself, why
Mm.
can't I? Why can't I do that thing? I've always felt that no makes me work harder. I'm dyslexic, which I didn't know till I was in my 50s when they made me be a reading teacher. I was not a great student. when I was a kid, and I didn't know I was dyslexic. I came from a family of college graduates, and they just said I was stupid and lazy, right? I didn't know I had an issue. And my brother came to me when I was packing to go to my freshman year in college, and he says, "I'm going to make you a bet." He said, "You're too stupid to be in college. You will flunk out by Christmas. Bet you $20." And honestly, I would have rather been hit by a truck than lose that bet. So when I got to college, I made a plan. I'm like, I'm never doing all-nighters. I'm never partying before a test. If I have a test on a Friday, I'm going to start studying on Sunday. I'm never going to cut class. And I did extremely well in college. So I think the point is no made me work harder. And so I think we have to take no as maybe a gift. That would be one. Oh gosh, tell me the question again.
So yeah, two more lessons that you learned that like you think would be great for people that are younger, still traveling where they're going, still trying to figure it out.
If things aren't going your way, and I think about this when I was first a teacher, look in the mirror. If things aren't working really well, sometimes we don't like to think it's us. We like to think it's other people. We like to say they're the problem. But when I was first a teacher and I was not completely into it and I was so hard on the kids, I really needed to look in the mirror. And I'm so grateful to the woman who told me to be nicer and the one who told me to take in a foster kid,
Mm.
that you have to be open to considering that maybe you're the problem. And I would say too, don't wait too long. Okay, I spent too many years between the end of my TV career and the beginning of my teaching career, 5 years where I officiated all the time. But what I also was a print reporter. That also happened. I had to be open and willing to do things that I thought were beneath me. For example, when I couldn't get a job doing anything but officiating, I applied for a job with a small newspaper in Phoenix, and it said they were looking for a sports reporter. I went over there. I said, "Please hire me." They said, "You don't know how to write sports." I said, "I wrote sports for 10 years, but that was TV. That wasn't real." I'm like, "No, give me a chance." I begged for a $7 an hour job.
Mm.
And they gave it to me. And you know what? All my stories kept ending up on the front page of the paper. And then another paper hired me. And then I wrote for magazines. And I that's how I ended up being an author. People go, "How did you end up writing books?" Well, I went from writing for TV, which is very condensed writing. I went to be a print reporter where I'm writing for magazines and newspapers. And so writing books was just a longer form of storytelling. So I would say be open to things, even though you think you're better than that, right? You're better than that 7 hour job, dollar an hour job with a little newspaper. So I learned a lot along the way. And had I not done the TV writing, the newspaper magazine writing, I wouldn't write books today. So all of it leads somewhere. And don't we plan our lives? We think everything's going to go in an orderly fashion. It does not. It's not going to go in an orderly fashion. Stuff's going to happen. We have to learn to roll with it. And I would tell my younger self that, like, oh, get over yourself and get back out there. So
I
those are
love
my.
it. I love it. So recap, take no as a gift, look in the mirror when you have problems because they very well could be coming from you, and be open to things that you might not think are important or you might not want to do or you think are beneath you, right? So I absolutely love that message. I think those are great things for everyone that's listening to think about because like if you think you're too good for something, there's something wrong with the way your mind is working because nobody is too good for anything. It's funny. So my real job, I'm the CEO of a company that runs and operates grocery stores in Chicago. And I love doing the podcast because I get to meet so many interesting people and I learn so much through the podcast. But along the way, I've done other things. So I've flipped probably between 30 and 40 houses, for example. And we bought a house one time for super cheap because it had had a sewage backup and the basement was literally 6 inches deep with shit, like human
Nice.
feces, 6 inches. And they hadn't cleaned it. So it had kind of wafted upstairs and there was mold upstairs. And so we know how to deal with all that stuff. But I priced it out to get a company I knew that did that work. And it was crazy expensive. I'm like, it's going to chew up all of our profit. So I grabbed my sons and said, guess what? We're putting the hazmat suits on and we're doing this ourselves. And they're like, it's full of shit. I'm like, yep. It's full of shit. You're right. Now put your fucking hazmat suit on and let's get down there and shovel the shit out of there. And they were like, we could pay someone to do this. I said, really? Do you have 30 grand? They're like, no. I said, then put your fucking hazmat suit on because I ain't spending 30 grand on this. We can do this for way cheaper on our own. So I tell that story to people like, if you think you're too good for stuff, I run businesses and I was shoveling shit 5 years ago out of a house. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not going to listen to I'm too good for or it's beneath me. Save it. You can go preach that somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I love, yeah.
I have to admit, I felt that way. I thought, how could I be on network TV and now I'm begging for a $7 an hour job? Yeah, no, I admit it. And now I realize how ridiculous I was.
No, it's
Take,
great. Like it
take
doesn't matter.
your,
I live in a glass house, so I don't throw stones. It's not my place to
yeah.
judge people. It's not my place to tell people they're right or wrong. All I can tell you is what I've learned in my 53 years and what's worked for me and what hasn't. I took a job one time and so I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, but me and my wife moved our family all the way across the country when our kids were really young. All of them were under 10, and we moved 3,000 miles away. We didn't know a single person where we moved to. It just was a good job opportunity. So we took it. And from 3 weeks from the time it presented itself, 3 weeks later, we lived on the East Coast. We just picked up stakes and moved. And I got there and I felt like I was struggling, like I wasn't going to make it. I literally went home and told my wife one night, I said, hey, we might have to move back. I don't know what to tell you. And like, I'm an A type, win the game, die before failure personality. That's how I am. And it got to the point where we worked in and a lot of you guys are too young to remember this, but the office we lived in had one of the water bubblers. So the jokes about water coolers are real because there used
Oh
to be a
yeah, they're
place where you
real.
had to go to get
Yeah,
water.
right.
And the jugs of water were like 5 gallon jugs and they were heavy as hell. And so I'm a big, strong guy. And there was one water cooler over by my office, and it was where the entire administrative staff sat. And it was a bunch of women, and they literally weren't strong enough to change those water bottles. So I made sure that water bubbler was full because I was like, you know what? If it comes down to me and someone else getting fired, at least I can be the guy that they both might suck at their job, but at least Joe keeps the water bubbler filled. Um, I swear to God, that was my mentality. I was like, I'm not too good for nothing. I got to feed a family here. And I went into my 6 month review and I was expected to be put on probation. I was expected to be put on a performance plan, something. And they told me, you've picked up on our system faster than anyone we've ever brought in from outside of the company. I'm like, you got to be fucking kidding me. I've been like a trout in the boat this whole time. I've been trying to get oxygen and I'm not getting it. And they said, no, you're doing way better than anyone we've ever brought in from the outside of the company. So you don't always know how things are going. But if you take the mentality that I got to fight and scratch and claw for my survival, usually you're going to end up in a pretty good spot. You don't want to do anything illegal, don't want to do anything unethical, but you got to do anything legal and ethical within your power to make yourself successful. That's the mentality that's going to get you somewhere.
We are our harshest critics,
For sure.
so I'm exactly like you. I mean, if it's not, I haven't done it right.
For sure. So what kind of books do you write?
No sports books. People are
I
like, you know
didn't
what?
think
No.
so.
Yeah, I write novels based on real situations or real events. My first book was actually about the gentleman who was my partner, the Vietnam veteran. It's a lot of his memories, but it's tied in with a domestic violence attack on a train in Arizona. 1995, it was derailed in the Arizona desert. It was deadly, and it remains a cold case crime. It was shortly after the Oklahoma City bombing, and I went out there and covered it like after it happened, and I wrote a novel about that wreck and what might have happened there. I wrote one about a young girl in a religious cult. We have a group of religious whack jobs in northern New Jersey, northern Arizona, and the men married 20 women, and it's horrible. Their leader, Warren Jeffs, was put in prison for being married to a 12-year-old.
Oh, I knew Warren Jeffs. I know that. I know
Yeah,
that
yeah.
situation.
It's about
Yep.
that. I went up there. I went up to Colorado City and pretended I didn't know who they were. And it was terrifying. I've been
Hmm.
rarely afraid in my life. It was terrifying. The women in the prairie dresses
Yep.
and so I wrote a book about a 16-year-old and a boy who escapes foster care. That book is called The Scent of Rain, and it's dedicated to my kids. I wrote one called Wild Horses on the Salt. We have a wild horse problem in Arizona People are shooting them. The environmentalists want to keep them. It's a mess. And I wrote a book about that book brings domestic violence into the world of the environment in Arizona. I have a book called Wolfcatcher, which went out of print, but it's coming back now. And it's about a man who was buried 900 years ago outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. This is true. They dug him up in 1939, 600 beautiful funerary objects. But he didn't look like the Native Americans who were buried him, the ancestors of the Hopi. And I was asked by a magazine to go find out who he might have been. And I got in all kinds of trouble. I asked for a DNA test and a tooth to the Hopi tribe. They were horrified, told me not to write the story. And so anyway, the story follows who this man might have been. And he lived in the 11th century, about the time a volcano erupted in Sunset Crater Volcano in Arizona. So it goes back and forth between the true story of what I was dealing with, but I fictionalize it, and who he might have been and what life was like living in the high desert in Arizona 1,000 years ago. And my most recent book is called Your Forgotten Sons. It came out a year ago on D-Day. A friend of mine asked me to be her healthcare power of attorney, and I had to fly to Baltimore. She had a tumor wrapped around her spinal cord. She said, "I need you to be my healthcare power of attorney because I might wake up and be paralyzed from the waist down." And so I was there to do that for her. And the night before the surgery, she hands me a Ziploc bag full of 75-year-old letters from her Uncle Bud, who never came back from World War II. And he worked in the Graves Registration Service. Do you know what that is?
I don't.
These are the guys who located, identified, and buried the dead. So when you see that magnificent cemetery at Normandy, his guys built it. And
Wow.
cemeteries like that, Graves Registration or Mortuary Division, we call it today, there's like 26 American cemeteries worldwide that these men had to, and I guess women today, but this man hit the beaches at Normandy. He was at the Battle of the Bulge. He was with Patton in Czechoslovakia. Some of these guys opened the death camps, and they have to identify, and at Normandy, guys were blown up all over the place. They might only get a foot.
Yep.
She asked me to write his story from these letters. That is the hardest book I've ever written. It was 5 years of my life. It came out last June 6th. I'm recovering from that one, but that's called Your Forgotten Sons. And it's dedicated to all those who served in the Graves Registration Service.
Wow. What a great subject.
I love history. In another life, I'd be an archaeologist probably. But yeah, I studied history a great deal. So that I was very fortunate. That I wrote sort of during the pandemic. I had planned to go to France he's still buried in France. Bud did not come home. And but I was stuck like everybody else. So I went to Miami University in Ohio, has a branch campus in Luxembourg, where I went as a junior and studied World War II extensively. I even got to go to Russia and other things. So bottom line is I knew a lot about it. So that helped. And that's where he was. He was in Luxembourg. So yeah, that was a very difficult book and very different. All my other 4 or 5 books are all based in Arizona.
Wasn't Luxembourg the second country invaded by Germany in World War II? Didn't they go from Dutch
Invaded
to
Luxembourg. Yeah, Luxembourg's a
yeah.
tiny little country. It's full of castles and today banks, and it has a big valley around it called the Grund, which is a deep valley. People live down in it, but there are these big, massive, beautiful bridges across, like 2 of them, maybe more. And when the Germans were advancing, they put up a sign that said "Halt." They like blocked the road with a wooden horse, Don't. And the good news for the Luxembourgers, which is what they're called, is that the Germans considered them like little siblings because they spoke German and French and Luxembourgish that no one in the world understands but them. And so they didn't destroy Luxembourg. Some of the outlying parts of it did, but they did not bomb Luxembourg City, which was originally founded by the Romans. So it's been there a long time. It's a
Yeah.
magnificent. And so they weren't destroyed, but the Germans came in and they said, okay, you can't have French names on your streets anymore, and you can't wear a French beret. And they conscripted all the men in this country, and many of them said no and disappeared and worked for the resistance, or some did. So they weren't bombed, which was kind of nice. But yeah, because I lived there and studied the war, I think that's what made me qualified to write that book about Bud. But that was a very difficult, and you think about what these men were doing, it was atrocious. I mean, again, they were the ones that cleaned up the death camps. So they have the highest suicide rate of any soldiers.
Mm,
And they came home were embarrassed by what they did. They didn't tell their families what they did. They didn't mention it in the letters home. Of course, there were censors. You weren't supposed to say a lot of stuff, but it was heartbreaking to see what happened to him. Also, he married a woman 2 weeks, like right before he shipped out, which a lot of men did, because I think they thought they were going to not come back or whatever. And there were some unscrupulous women who took advantage of that. And his wife was one of those people. So it's a very sad book. And it's necessarily gruesome. I didn't feel I could sugarcoat it. That would do them a disservice. So
yeah,
that's where I am.
for sure.
Yeah, the book Wolfcatcher about the man who was buried 900 years ago, as I said, is coming out again. So that's what I'm working on now. It's with a new publisher. I don't know if I'm going to write any more books. It's exhausting. The publishing industry, boy, I'm glad I was an umpire and a referee and a sportscaster and a teacher in high school, because that's prepared me for how horrible the publishing world is. And I'm so lucky I have a pension and Social Security, because I couldn't be living on that. When I meet young people who go, I'm going to be a writer, I'm like, don't quit your day job. Please don't. Study something that will pay you and write because you love to write. And I do
Yeah.
love to write.
Yeah. That's excellent. That's excellent. So, wow, what a journey. When you look back on it all, I know you said you wouldn't change anything. And you talked about, I asked you the three things that you'd impart to younger folks. Um, if you had to pick, I don't know if a highlight or a low light, what's a fond memory and what's a difficult memory through all of the stuff you've been through? Let's call it just fond and difficult. Let's not rank it.
I think I've told you a lot of the difficult ones, the times
Sure.
when it's one thing if I screw up on my own accord, but when someone else helps me screw up through sabotage or something, those are things that really upset me.
Yep.
Go home and why are they doing this to me? Same way in officiating. I mean, I when I was an official, I was often thrown off crews early on because the guys would say, "We're never getting a state championship with you on our crew because you're a woman," and they were right. And then I went on to become a referee. Are you a football fan?
I'm a football fan. Yes.
Okay. How many referees are on a football field?
Are you counting the backup crew or?
I am talking about referees on a football field. And I'll give you a hint. It's kind of a trick question. It's the same at Pop Warner as it is in the NFL.
So, I think there's one referee and then everybody else has a different kind of job, right? A line
Very good.
judge and yeah,
An umpire, back judge, side
yeah,
headlines. I became a referee, which means I was the white hat, which I'm the one that says we have holding 76 offense.
yeah. You're
10
running
yards.
the crew. Yeah,
But
you're running the
I
crew.
am the
Yeah.
crew chief. And I got tired of being thrown off crews. And I finally stood up in a meeting of 400 football officials when they said, who wants to be a referee and start a new crew? And I stood up. And I said, any guy that walked up to me was going to understand they were never getting the state championship. They knew what they were getting. And early on, I got guys that nobody else wanted, the guys, and that's okay. And eventually I ended up with men who worked with me for 12, 13 years at a time.
Mm.
And those men remain some of my dearest friends. Now, did we ever get the state championship? No, of course we didn't, even though we were really good officials. That always made me feel bad. I always thought every year will be different. Every year, maybe this year we'll get
This
a
is the
playoff.
year, right?
Yeah, it never happened. I mean, we
Yeah.
worked some playoffs, but very few. And I kept thinking, why aren't you people using me? I'd be good PR. Come on. But yeah, that is something that bothered me, that made me feel bad. That all those 40 years I was an official. And baseball and football were the ones I loved the best. And I had one of my bosses came up to me, goes, it's really too bad that you don't officiate women's sports. You might get somewhere.
Oh,
He
geez.
actually said that to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, but I love football and baseball. Those are the ones I love. So that would be the one thing that not that I regret. I had no control over it.
Yep.
But that and I guess the thing that's really cool is that I'm a mom.
Yeah.
I who knew that was going to happen? So life again is going to zig and zag on you. Just hop on the horse and go with it.
So I actually umpired as well after I was done playing and done coaching. I was like, I'd like to be around the game. I'd be a good umpire. And so I umpired quite a bit. I much prefer home plate to the bases because you're
Oh, me
engaged
too.
in every pitch, you know.
Absolutely.
Standing
Yeah.
out there, standing out there in A or B position is it can get kind of boring sometimes for me. But some of my favorite stories, I one was when I was a coach and we had, you know, in some little leagues they just have the other coaches umpire other games. So, you know, if you've got whatever teams A, B, C, and D, if teams A and B are playing, the coaches from team D are responsible for umpiring the game. And that was the first time I recognized that, hey, most of these guys don't have a fucking clue what they're doing. So I'll give you this scenario because you're an umpire and you'll appreciate it. So there's a runner on first base. There's a ground ball hit towards the second baseman. The second baseman charges the ground ball to field it. Before the ground ball gets to it and he's able to make an attempt on the ball, the runner trucks him because he's right in the baseline. He didn't hit him on purpose.
Doesn't matter.
However, yeah, the umpire or yeah, the guy umpiring called interference on the fielder and awarded the runner second base. And I called timeout. And I said, "Hey, look, I'm not out here to argue this call, but you're 100% wrong and you just taught 22 little boys the wrong rule in baseball. The defensive player has the right to an attempt before
Field the ball. Yeah.
any contact is allowed. And you just said the opposite." He said, "You're wrong." I said, "I'm not arguing the call. Let it stand. What I want you to do is promise me you're going to read the rule book on this rule so you know it going forward. Will you promise me you'll do that? And I'll go back to my bench and we'll just keep playing." And he said, "You can't make me." I said, "I'm going to stay out here and I'll make a huge stink of it because I'm right and you're wrong. I've been playing baseball since I was 6 fucking years old and I know the rule."
I would have to throw him out then
Yeah.
at that point. But understand officiating, we can't keep young officials. 50% of new officials quit within 2 years
Yeah.
because because of the abuse. Now, when I was an official, there wasn't the internet. So what that meant is I'm working a game, we have a questionable call, one I can't do anything about. Sometimes that happens. We blink,
Yep.
I had a long day at work, I'm tired, I'm hungry, something happens, we get a wrong call. Okay, fine. And it's over though. Even though sometimes I needed a police escort to my car, by the time I get in my car, I go home, it's over. Today, people put that shit on the internet. They put a
It's
picture of
crazy.
Bob Jones, the umpire, and he wanted this team to win, and he's terrible. It's no wonder we can't keep officials. It's a thankless job. Now, do
It
I
is,
sit at
isn't
home
it?
and watch football or baseball on TV? Do I criticize officials? Yes, I do it at home, but I'm not going to go out there and criticize someone on the field, especially young officials. It's a hard job. We don't have 9 camera angles. We don't have guys in the booth to ask about it. We get one shot, one look. And we're not
Yep.
always right. You know what I learned? It finally took me a while to learn. Coaches screaming, yelling on the sidelines is something my crew did. I would go over and I'd say, "Oh, coach, I think you're right. Maybe we didn't get a solid look at that, but we're going to knuckle down and do better." And then they would stop yelling. They'd be like, they would expect me to argue. I go, "There we go." And you don't give it back. Nobody calls one the other way the next time. That you can't do that. So the bottom
Yep.
line is yeah, maybe we didn't get a good shot at that. But I
Yep.
don't go running over to him because he calls a stupid play. I don't go chastising the quarterback because he missed the receiver by, 30 yards. So cut us a break. We're regular people. We're not in the NFL. We're just doctors and teachers and Uber drivers who happen to want to stay in the game. And they don't seem to
Yep.
get that. So what's happening now, even when I was still in, I said I retired in 2019, there weren't enough officials to do JV freshman games. There weren't enough to do varsity football on Friday night. So they had to stretch varsity football from Thursday to Friday to Saturday sometimes
Wow.
because there aren't enough officials. It's going to get worse. 40, I think 45, 46% of officials say they felt threatened in a game by parents, coaches, administrators. And yeah, and as I said, I've had police escorts to my car over high school football.
Yeah.
So
People lose perspective all the time. For what it's worth, the coach that was umpiring was a guy my age. I would never ever, I
still,
would
it's
never ever,
not.
I would never ever talk to a kid.
I know you've seen the
That,
videos online of people abusing 14-year-old
oh no, no,
umpires.
for sure. Yeah, I'm 100% with you.
how is anybody supposed to learn? The problem with officiating is you have to learn on the job. You
Exactly.
can do a few scrimmages, but then you got to go out there and take what you read in a book or what you think. I love when people go, I played for years. That doesn't mean you understand the games. It
Exactly.
means you have your position. If you're a defensive back, maybe you don't understand what happens on the offensive side of the ball. Okay. So the bottom line is we have to, take classes and take exams every year, and you had to get a 90 or above on your exam every year. That's a lot of rules. So my attitude is all coaches should have to take a test. They should have to go through the same kind of stuff the officials do. And and then if you get into things like men's leagues where there's no, they got 40-year-old guys playing baseball or football who think they're still scouts in the stands. It's like, no, this is supposed to be fun, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I
It's
don't
funny.
know.
I played in a men's league baseball league in my 30s, and that was like there was guys there that yeah, they were thinking that there was, scouts sitting there with radar guns in the
Oh,
back. I'm
yeah,
like,
they do.
what are you guys fucking doing? Like, we're all going to work on Monday. Like, what are
Right,
you doing?
right, right. But I will say this, for a couple of years, I did the men's international World Series, men's league, amateur,
Hmm.
I umpired it, and they had teams from around the world. It was so much fun. We had a team come from Holland. And the captain comes out, the manager comes out to do, to exchange lineups. And he's
Yeah.
got little Heineken socks and little wooden shoes to give us. I'm like, this is so cool, because it's always so damn serious. Totally weird segue maybe, but when I first became an official, and really most of my career, I'm pretty, you give me a rule and I'm going to call the rule. I understand there's the spirit and intent of the rule as well as the rule itself.
Sure.
Meaning, could we call holding on every play in football? Of course we could. So we call the ones that affected the play or the ones that are personal fouls, like a takedown, something like that. So I'm pretty
Yeah.
anal about following the rules. So when I first became a baseball umpire, I read the rule book. The strike zone was armpits to knees, right? That's how it's written. Nobody calls that.
Yeah.
So I got fun of a lot because, especially kids' games. Why do I want a postage stamp strike zone? That would be ridiculous. We'll have a 4-hour game with 12-year-olds. So years go by, and I'm asked to umpire an exhibition game between the San Francisco Giants and the Phoenix Firebirds, their AAA team, and I
Okay.
got the plate. There was some argument. They tried to take it away from me that night. It was going to be televised. We don't want her behind the but that they stood firm and said, no, she's working the plate. So Dusty Baker comes out with his lineup card, and we have our little plate meeting, and the other manager walks away, and Dusty leans in. He goes, did I mention we have a plane to catch? And I went, ah, I know what Dusty wants. And so these other umpires who think they're all so important are out in the field. And the first kid came up to bat, and I called him on a high pitch strike three, right? He just looked at me, walked off. And so the whole game I called a strike zone like that, like it's
Yep.
written in that game was over in an hour and 55 minutes, right? I knew I was going to take shit for this, but at the end of the game, it's beautiful sunset, Arizona sunset, and Dusty is just a little bit out of the dugout, and he looks at me and he gives me a big Dusty smile, and
Tips the hat.
he walks up. That's one of my favorite moments of sports.
Oh,
I
that's
just went,
awesome.
real strike zone, yes, because I don't know. They call ones so nobody can see if they're wrong. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
Mhm.
Well,
I still
Amy,
have the lineup card, by the way. I still have that lineup card.
I would keep that too for sure. Dusty Baker, he finally got his World Series with the Astros too.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So one of the things we do as we wind down here is we want to open the floor. Is there anything I haven't asked you about or any subjects we haven't talked about that you feel strongly about or you want to make sure we talk about before we part ways?
Um,
Could be anything.
the only thing I could think of is that I think happiness is being curious about things. Okay. I'm so fortunate that I have a lot of things. I'm a rock collector. People laugh at me. I have 400 mineral specimens in my living room alone. I
Mm.
have 20 right behind me here. And I'm a scuba diver and I play the guitar. I love music. And to me, I've learned as I've gotten older that some of these things go away. I can't ski anymore. I'm not an ice skater anymore. I'm not a football official or baseball umpire. I miss those things. But I think if you have a lot of things you're interested in, um, that you can be happy still. Sometimes I sit around, I feel bad. I'm like, oh, these things I can't do anymore. Because remember
Mm,
when they told us sports were good for us? Remember that?
yes. Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I have the MRIs and the X-rays and the scars to prove they're not. Okay. Because when you're old, all of the injuries come back and bite you. I mean, I have metal in my leg and metal in my neck and broken bones. But would I still do all that stuff? Yes. I mean, I broke my back in a football. But the bottom line is we're going to lose the ability to do some things. And I worry about this with kids, especially youth sports, where kids are only playing one sport and they're playing club all year round. And that's the only thing they do.
Ugh.
I want to say, mom, dad, let them be in a play, let them play the trombone, let them be on the debate team, let them be on the newspaper. We need variety in our lives because we're not always going to be able to do the things we like or love.
Well, and you
And I
should
think that,
raise
yes,
well-rounded kids too.
yes, and especially when I talk about sports a lot, I offended some people last week because I wrote a blog about that. Like sports, youth sports are falling apart because mom and dad are so sure their kid is getting the D1 scholarship and they're going to be a pro. No, they're not. 2% ever get a Division I scholarship, and they're year to year. So you break your leg or you can't hack it in the classroom, your career is over. And now you have a child who has only ever played baseball or football or basketball or whatever since the time they were little. What do they do now? To them, their lives are over. This is why professional athletes often become alcoholics and drug addicts. It's the
Yep.
only thing they ever did. So I am incredibly grateful that I'm constantly curious about things. And as some of these things I get older and older, I won't be able to do them. I hope I have other things I'm still curious about. So I think we need to be more well-rounded people. We just do. And as much as I love sports, they can't be the only thing.
I love it. I love it.
Oh,
What
I
a
want to
great
say one
message.
thing.
Yeah,
One of the
good.
highlights of my football career. It's halftime. Here comes the marching band. And here comes a kid with football pants on, no jersey, just like a t-shirt, and he's playing the trumpet in the marching band. And I went, not only are you the coolest kid ever, but your coach is the coolest coach
Yeah,
ever.
somebody
Because
gets it. Somebody gets it.
he doesn't care that you're not listening to his incredibly brilliant speech at halftime. He's allowing you to play the trumpet in the marching band. I almost wept, but there's no crying out there, so you can't do that. Yeah, that's what I want. I want more kids to be involved in more things so that as things go away in our lives, like I was really into music and singing and all that. And then I went into sports for so many years. I forgot about that. Didn't pick up my guitar for 35 years. Now I picked it up again. So the
Mm,
thing is, we need to be more well-rounded people. And I think the older I get, the less well-rounded people seem to be.
yeah, I agree with you, especially around youth sports. It's just crazy
Yeah.
the way people approach it now. And I don't know. I think some of that's driven by the ability to post and like you see all these
Yeah.
like I was one of the 2% that wound up with the Division I scholarship, and I played three sports my entire life, and then I was the kicker on our football team my senior year, so I actually played four sports. And I remember my freshman year, the basketball coach said, "Hey, if you don't participate in every summer basketball thing event, you're not eligible for varsity next year." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "So we'll see you there." I said, "Fuck no, you won't see me there. I play baseball in the summer." I said, "I'm going to make every basketball thing I can. But if there's a conflict, it's baseball season. I'm going to baseball. If that means I'm a JV guy next year, I'm a JV guy next year, whatever." And guess what? I
Well,
made the
most
swing
kids
team.
are not that sure of themselves, and that's so
Yeah.
sad to me. That blog I wrote, I got a number of comments just like that. Oh, my daughter was told if she didn't go to volleyball camp where this coach is coaching as well, that she couldn't be on the varsity team. I'm like, that's barbaric. That when
Yeah.
my time I played three sports, and nobody did that. Now it's there. These coaches are convinced, these club teams are convincing parents that these kids are all going to be pros, and it's a lie, and it's horrible, and it hurts the kids, and that's what
You
I'm
know,
against.
yeah, I'm with you 100%. And I'll tell you what, I used to drive parents nuts when I started coaching baseball. My rule was if you could throw strikes, I'll pitch you in a game. Like, I don't care how hard you throw. We're not going to do a walkathon. If you can't get it over the plate, that doesn't help you. It slows the game down. It's not good for the hitters. But if you can throw strikes, we're not going to ride two kids and ruin their arms when they're 10 fucking years
Right.
old. And I
Right.
drove my parents nuts. And you know what? I think that team, the first team I coached, lost in the championship game and they were converts. And I said, look, I'm going to sound like a real asshole when I say that, but I've been at sports levels that none of you have even imagined before. Have you ever played in front of 10,000 people? I have. Have you ever had an athletic director come in and say you're not winning enough? We're going to fucking cut you all if you don't start winning games? I have. Like, I know what it's like to be in those situations. And my job is to develop your kids into good men, not good baseball
Yes.
players,
Good
good
people. This is
men.
the point. This is
Yes.
the point of youth sports. It is not so you can be a professional athlete. It's so
Nope.
you can learn how to follow rules, how to be punctual, how to be a leader, how to work together for the common good, teamwork.
How
These
to,
are business skills.
how to,
This
how
is
to
why we have
commit.
sports.
Yeah,
It's
how to sacrifice, how hard work pays off. All of those lessons that you'll carry into life to be a good father, a good
accountant,
husband, a
father.
good,
Yeah.
yeah,
We
exactly.
have lost that idea with this nil money and kids in high school getting, some college saying you're 14, we want you to come to our school. It's so out of hand
Yeah,
that it makes me sad. And yet I had parents say, well, our kids are really talented. I'm like, oh, fine. It's just let your kids do other things. This isn't going to be their life forever because someday I know many of the things I love to do, I can't do anymore because I'm 70.
yeah,
So get out there and be interested in other things. And maybe your kids should paint or go to camp. Oh, they're going to baseball camp. No, I mean camp. Go
yeah,
and meet other kids and
yeah.
canoe.
Fish,
Do something.
hike,
Yeah,
sing
yeah,
songs, roast
yeah. Be in
marshmallows. That's
nature.
camp.
Yeah, be in nature. So yeah, I think you sports are kind of bugging me. I do watch the NFL still. And my partner Ryan is NHL the whole way. So of course Stanley Cup's on tonight, so we'll be doing that. But other than that, I'm not a big sports fan anymore. It's odd.
Yeah, I hope Edmonton can rebound. They got boat raced by Florida
Oh,
in
I
that
want
last
them to
game,
win
but
too. I know.
yeah,
Yeah. We'll
I'd
have
like
a
to see a
final.
Canadian team win the Stanley Cup again. It's been
Yes, me too.
I think the Canadians were the last team to win this Stanley Cup, weren't they?
No, Florida wasn't it Florida?
No, no, the Canadian team to win the Stanley Cup. I
Oh,
think it was
oh,
Montreal.
I'm sorry. I thought you meant last
Yeah,
year. I don't remember. I
yeah,
I don't I read the sports page, but not like I used to. I used to read Sports Illustrated cover to cover. I used to read every article. But down here in the Virgin Islands, there's not a whole lot of sports page.
Mm,
They yeah, it just isn't a thing, you know.
totally. Well, Annie, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your willingness to share the good and the bad that you've experienced. And like I said, your story is so interesting because it takes so many twists and turns. And I appreciate your candor about, hey, I didn't always handle everything the best way possible. I spent time feeling sorry for myself, and I spent time doing this and that. And I just think it's such a great testament that when you take action and you don't give up and you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, it's going to lead you to a good place in life. And, at 40, when you were done on TV, not, involuntarily retired from television, if someone had told you, hey, you're going to wind up being a mother, you're going to wind up writing books, you would have said, get the hell out of here. But
Exactly. Exactly.
but you kept putting yourself in good situations. And I just think it's a testament. I'm just so happy that you're willing to come on and talk to our audience about it. So thank you so much for doing it.
And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So until next time, we'd love to have you back on sometime in the future. Maybe when your book comes out, you can come on and we can talk about that.
I might take you up on that.
Yeah. Hit us up when it comes out. We'd love to have you back on.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Annie. Take care. Okay, guys, like we said, what a great job by Annie, and we appreciate her being so candid about the things that didn't go well for her. And look, she said she spent time feeling sorry for herself. She spent time focusing on things that weren't important. She spent time kind of wallowing and et cetera, et cetera. but she always kept taking action. She always kept putting herself in situations that led her places. And she, rebuilt her life after the broadcasting career she'd built was unceremoniously ended, and has built an awesome life for herself. So just kudos to Annie, one, for her resiliency, and two, her willingness to come on and share her experiences and her lessons with our audience. So yeah, just keep tuning in, guys, because we just have so many awesome people lined up for these podcast interviews. We're very fortunate to find the people that we found. So James puts it up over here every day. Don't forget to head over to our website, saltygingertalk.com. All of our podcast episodes are available there. Links to all our social media accounts are available there. We've got a newsletter that we publish every weekday that you can subscribe to there. And if you can, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to our podcast, whatever platform you consume it on. It's super helpful for us. Thanks so much for joining us. You don't want to miss the next episode. We're going to keep having great people on, so we will see you there.